The First World War is infamous for its slaughter on the battlefields of Gallipoli, France and Belgium. We've all heard the terrible stories of soldiers caught in the awful meat grinder of the war. Despite the horrors, Australian and New Zealand soldiers forged a legend built on their resourcefulness and bravery and their undying mateship, which helped bring the survivors through the conflict. While the Anzac legend focuses its attention on the heroic ordinary soldier and sometimes the outstanding leadership of particular officers, one group of Anzacs is rarely included in the Anzac story: the chaplains. Daniel, a chaplain in a war zone, involved in the heat of battle, seems incongruous. Did the Anzac chaplains here at Gallipoli experience that?
Oh, yes. Most of the chaplains came from rural parishes or suburban churches. Most of their congregation were women. And all of a sudden, they're plucked out of that. They're put in an all-male congregation, many of whom had never been to church. And they're men trained to kill. T.P. Bennett, one chaplain, wrote that it seemed strange to be a man of God and a servant of the Prince of Peace and in the army. But on the other hand, some of the chaplains were very militant. They saw this as muscular Christianity at its best, and they were there for God, king and country, and so they had no problem with that. But for many of the officers and men, they also struggled with this idea of a chaplain who they saw as somebody weak and namby-pamby being in the army.
So how did the soldiers relate to these Anzac chaplains here at Gallipoli?
Oh, well, to be honest, chaplains were not popular to begin with. Most of the chaplains were given a very hard time by these soldiers. But it wasn't long before a good number of these chaplains won the respect of these soldiers simply because of how they related to them.
So what turned this perception around? Was it the personality of the chaplains, or was it the role that they played here at Gallipoli?
Generally speaking, it was both their personality and the way in which they conducted themselves in their role. Certainly the outgoing personalities, the outgoing chaplains did well. But then it was the chaplains who got involved in the ordinary, everyday life of the soldiers, who particularly won the respect, the admiration, and even the love, the adoration of the men.
My first feelings were that I would shut myself up in my cabin. Even there, I would not find any refuge. From outside my cabin floated the most fearful language I had ever heard. I think some of them must have been trying to shock the Padre. This was my first close contact with the digger.
So what was the role of the chaplains here at Gallipoli?
Well, theoretically, their role was way behind the front lines. He would see the soldiers when they came out of the line, run church services for them, run wholesome entertainments. In a time of battle, he would be at the field hospital, out of danger, but working with the doctors on the wounded. So a chaplain's role theoretically was quite removed from the heat of battle.
So that's what should happen theoretically with a chaplain, but what happened in reality here at Gallipoli regarding the chaplains?
Well, here at Gallipoli, there was no rear line. Everywhere was the front. Shell fire everywhere, sniper fire in many places, and so chaplains ran the same sort of risks as everybody else.
That's a story that not many of us know, that these Anzac chaplains, these men of religion, actually accompanied the soldiers to the front lines and participated and operated right here in the front lines behind us at Gallipoli.
Yes, and that's part of the reason why the chaplains here won respect, because they ran the same risks as the common soldier. They lived the same life, they were on the same diet. Now, ordinarily a chaplain was an officer and officers weren't particularly liked. He was also a non-combatant, and that was another reason why soldiers perhaps wouldn't have respect for a chaplain. But here, the chaplains were involved in every aspect of the soldiers' lives. They took risks that many soldiers wouldn't take, frequently rescuing wounded out in the open. One chaplain was noted as taking down the names of the dead in plain view of the Turks, while soldiers hid and admired his courage.
The Padre was moving about in full view of the enemy and was a very conspicuous figure. Chaplain Ray had a notebook and pencil in his hand, being evidently busy with the work of keeping a check of the names of the dead and a list of their personal effects. Some men were waiting under cover, and I heard one say to another as they looked back at the Padre, busy with his care for the wounded and the dead, "I'll tell you who've done good work here, these parsons."
Daniel, talk us through a typical day in the life of an Anzac chaplain here at Gallipoli.
Well, I'll take you through 2 typical days.
Okay.
A weekday would begin at first light, probably down at the beaches, visiting the wounded in the hospital, and then moving up through the valley, visiting various units under their care as they went, until they reached the front lines. They would distribute the mail, hand out parcels, and just socialise with the men and do what they could to lift their spirits.
Okay, and what about the second typical day that you mentioned?
Well, that would be the Sunday, and that was even more work because it would involve up to 5 church services a day, again from the beaches through to the frontline trenches. And being involved in moving around so much actually put them at more risk than many soldiers. A soldier would stay with their unit, often in some sort of protection, the trenches. It was those who had to move around who were most at risk from shell fire and snipers, and the chaplains were always on the move.
One chaplain estimated that the typical Padre worked 18 hours a day. This included the burial parties at night.
We get away at about 11 p.m. and back to our dugouts any time from 2:30 to 8 a.m, according to the work to be done.
As you can see, it's quite a steep climb up here from the beach, and I'm not as fit as I should be. But it's certainly a lot easier for me than it was for the chaplains. I'm not being shot at as I walk. Daniel, the activities here must have been very demanding on the Anzac chaplains, walking up these cliffs from the beach backwards and forwards during the day, and then burying the dead soldiers at night.
Yes, it was certainly a very physical ordeal for them. One chaplain noted that he'd have to become as hard as iron if he was going to survive here on Gallipoli. But it wasn't just the physical thing, the amount of walking that they did up and down the hills. In a way, they had to deal with an emotional strain much more than the soldiers. A soldier might lose a mate every now and then, but a chaplain dealt with death on a daily basis. Burying men that he probably knew very well, and writing letters to the families, and getting letters back, heart-wrenching letters, you know, they're just, I've read some of them, they're very emotional. And I don't think we should underestimate the emotional strain on top of the physical wear and tear that these chaplains endured here on Gallipoli. Dealing with the wounded was one of the hardest things the chaplains had to do. Often the wounds were very nasty, bodies torn open, organs hanging out, and it could be made worse by dirt, by maggots. Sometimes soldiers were brought in after several days of lying in the hot sun, wounded. One chaplain's diary I read, he talks of having to tear the bandages off terribly sunburnt men with large patches of skin coming away. And it was a horrifying experience for him to do. Made worse by the fact that some of the men that he treated made no sound at all, even though he knew they were in terrible agony. But it wasn't just the physical wounds that a chaplain had to deal with. There was also the emotional scarring, the constant dealing with men who are exposed to possible death at any moment. And constant shell fire, bullet fire, the risks they ran. Many men suffered emotionally to the point where they couldn't cope anymore. Today we talk about shell shock or post-traumatic stress disorder, but they had no terms for it then and no understanding either. They simply thought that men lacked the nerve or lacked courage. But chaplains were often more sympathetic to the kinds of strains that the soldiers endured because many of them were pushed to the emotional brink themselves.
I wanted to bubble and cry, take them in my arms and soothe them, for their nerves were all racked as well as their actual wounds. Instead, I joked with them and made them laugh, gave them cigarettes to smoke while I pulled the hard bandage from the wounds. The grateful looks on their faces as the wounds were freshly dressed were something to remember.
You had to be tough to be an Anzac chaplain here at Gallipoli. But some of the stories that come out of here are amazing. Not even their regular duties were enough. Some chaplains are on record as having overheard a soldier wish for a fresh egg or a chocolate, so the chaplain hunted all over the peninsula till he had enough for each man in his unit, probably 400 or 500. One night, a chaplain single-handedly cut steps into a steep and difficult part of the track to make it easier for water carriers and stretcher bearers. So Daniel, we've spoken about the activities of a chaplain on a typical day. What about on a day of battle?
Usually their place was at the first aid post, helping with the wounded. But there were chaplains who would stick close behind the attackers so that they were able to be with the wounded and the dying while the battle was still raging. But then their work after the battle was probably the biggest thing. It was their task to continue helping with the wounded, to give last rites to those who were dying, and then the very sad task of identifying the dead. Soldiers on Gallipoli carried 2 discs tied on a string round their neck. They were usually round, but they could be hexagonal or oval or some other shape. But they both carried the same information: the soldier's name, their serial number, their battalion, and their religion. So the chaplain would take one disc and place it with the body. The other disc they would keep as proof that the soldier had died. And it wasn't unknown for a chaplain after a very big battle to come out with 3 or 4 bags of these discs. You can imagine the emotional impact this would have on a chaplain having to conduct so many burials in such a short time.
Daniel, here at Queen's Post, we are right on the front line.
Yeah.
Here some of the fiercest fighting in the entire campaign took place.
Yep.
Now, we know that the Turkish and Anzac trenches were merely metres apart here at Queen's Post. We know also that the Anzac chaplains came up here to the front line to visit their soldiers. Do we know whether these chaplains were actually involved in the fighting itself?
Well, we know they weren't. There are some wonderful myths floating around of chaplains leading charges, this sort of heroic stuff, but they're fabrications. In fact, a couple of the chaplains noted in their diary at the time that these stories were floating around and were totally untrue.
Stories are told about myself and a couple of other chaplains leading charges on the first day here, which of course is piffle.
The men greatly appreciate the work of the chaplain and are overgenerous in their estimates. If you carry a fellow's rifle to help or some such thing as that, you have led a charge.
There was one particularly militant chaplain, however, and that was the New Zealander Henare Te Wanohu, who was known to carry a revolver at times. He even performed a haka on the Anzac skyline.
With the whole of the Anzac positions under artillery fire, it was very difficult to run church services. On a given Sunday, provided conditions permitted it, the chaplains would move through the trenches like these at the Neck, running communion and worship services for a few dozen men at a time.
On Sunday afternoons, a little after 4, you'd see the Padre coming down Shrapnel Valley singing Jesus, Lover of My Soul, and the lads coming out of the dugouts like rabbits out of burrows and following him. When he got them into a comparatively sheltered corner, he proceeded to lead them in a short Sunday afternoon service.
The storms of life is past, safe into the haven guide. Oh, receive my soul at last.
One writer tells us of a Sunday evening worship service. Imagine the scene. Dotted around this bowl of hills are the small campfires of the men in their posts. Over the bay, the moon shines on the water, and the stars seem close and bright. Overhead, the occasional shell explodes or bullet whines. But here, a chaplain is running a service. Crammed into a trench corner, about 30 men begin singing. Their hymn is taken up by the sentries at their posts, and gradually the men in other trenches around take up the song. Passing by, a platoon of armed warriors joins in the hymn as they march through to their new post. It's enough to make my spine tingle.
Keep me pure within. Thou of life, the fountain art, freely let me take of thee. Spring thou up within my heart, rise to all eternity.
It's easy to overlook the chaplains in the Anzac story, yet they were here and worked and suffered alongside their fellows. And their impact could be great. Chaplain Blackwood, who was shocked by the language of the Anzacs when he first met them, noted this once he got to know them.
I have learned long since that the Australian soldier is a hypocrite, or perhaps to put it more mildly, a camouflage artist. To one who had not the sympathy to look beneath the surface, he seemed rather a hopeless proposition from the point of view of religion. The Aussie loved to pretend he had no religion, when all the time, deep beneath the surface, in most cases, he had a real sense of God and of his moral law.
And even those who are not religious found comfort in the rituals of prayer and song. And the chaplains did so much to provide those little comforts that eased the burden on the soldiers. And soldiers, as well as families at home, really appreciated having a clergyman read the service over their fallen comrades. So this story of Anzac, which has become its own religion in Australia and New Zealand, turns out to have more conventional religious aspects as well. Though it has been rarely admitted, faith and religion did play its small part in the legend of Gallipoli.
In this bulletin, experts gather in the Caribbean to discuss religious freedom. Official recognition as a Christian charity battles human trafficking. And Chuck Colson dies at 80 years old.
This is In Focus Christian News and Current Affairs.
Hi, welcome to Record in Focus. Is your medicine actually making you sick? The doc's in a bit later to talk about some nasty side effects of some common medications. And speaking of nasty drugs, we'll meet a man who says he had a $10,000 a week addiction until Christ stepped in. You're not going to want to miss that interview. But first we start with our news. Danielle?
Thanks, James. The 7th World Congress for Religious Freedom met this week in the Dominican Republic to explore the challenges of secularism to the free expression of faith. More than 800 government officials, legal experts and religious liberty advocates from 60 countries registered to attend the 3-day Congress.
Even in the countries where we have religious freedom, some believers, see the increasing of secularism in the society as a potential threat for religious freedom.
The World Congress for Religious Freedom is convened once every 5 years by the International Religious Liberty Association, which is sponsored by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. A Christian human rights organisation based in Austria says 85% of anti-religious hate crimes in Europe are directed at Christians. The Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians cites studies that show an increasing number of Europeans feel their societies are negative towards Christianity. Other statistics show that the number of attacks on churches, cemeteries and religious symbols have nearly doubled in 2 years. However, the Observatory's report does not take into account the fact that Christians hold a very large majority in Europe, where there are many more churches than non-Christian places of worship. An Adventist aid organisation has been officially recognised by the government of Nepal for its role in protecting and rehabilitating women and girls from human trafficking. Workers from the Women's Safe Haven in the west of the country help identify and rescue victims of trafficking at border crossings with India. The shelter works with girls and women at risk, providing a safe place, education and training in useful job skills. Nepali government officials have visited the Women's Safe Haven, congratulated them for their 8 years of service to the nation and offered ongoing assistance. The Women's Safe Haven is supported by Asian Aid, an Australian-based charity run by Seventh-day Adventist Church members. In recent decades, Australians have been rocked by accounts of forced removals, deception and institutional abuse of Indigenous children and child migrants from the UK. But now, according to the Australian newspaper, a new stolen generation is emerging. Children of mixed ethnic parentage who were taken from their families in Papua New Guinea and brought to Australia during the 1960s. Elizabeth Canny says she was one of at least 10 mixed-race children taken by church workers from a Catholic boarding school in PNG and brought to Australia for adoption. Ms Canny says her removal was done without her family's knowledge and wonders how many others may have experienced similar events. No church or government records have emerged so far. Amid the discussion around the likely consequences of carbon tax on Australians, a new fear has emerged, this time from the Salvation Army. According to the Daily Telegraph, the carbon tax will see an increase in the cost of a trip to the rubbish tip, which the Salvos say could add up to $1.25 million to their annual expenses. About 25% of goods donated to charities are unusable and end up as landfill. And the Salvation Army is concerned that this percentage will rise as people dump their unwanted goods at charity bins rather than taking them to the tip. If all goes to plan, the earthquake-damaged city of Christchurch in New Zealand's South Island will have a new cathedral by Christmas, a cardboard one that is. The innovative transitional cathedral is just one of a number of temporary cardboard structures designed by Japanese architect Shigeru Ban. Others have been built after earthquakes in Japan, Turkey, Haiti and other places. According to the Anglican Communion News Service, Christchurch's $4.5 million structure will seat 700 people and is expected to last for at least 20 years. Local church leaders say it will be a symbol of hope for the city. The New Zealand government has decided to follow Australia's lead in introducing plain packaging for cigarettes. According to News Medical, the Cabinet has approved plans that will see cigarette packs stripped of corporate logos. Instead, they'll display only health warnings and contact details for the government's Quit Smoking phone line. Health groups have welcomed the initiative.
Plain packaging is another nail in the coffin for cigarette branding. And of course, cigarette branding has a huge influence on purchase choices, especially in our younger generation. They're so influenced by branding and what looks cool and what's good. And it's not only cigarette companies, but it's alcohol companies.
The founder of the International Prison Fellowship Ministry, Chuck Colson, has died from medical complications after experiencing a brain hemorrhage in late March. He was 80 years old. In 1974, American Chuck Colson spent several months in federal prison for his involvement in the Watergate scandal. Shocked at the conditions behind bars, he began to advocate for prisoners after his release and established Prison Fellowship, which now offers assistance and brings the gospel to prisoners, ex-prisoners and their families in 100 countries around the world. Colson was an evangelist, broadcaster and author who worked for unity between churches and was one of the Christian world's most sought-after speakers. Adventists in Guatemala have held more than 1,000 evangelistic campaigns during the last 3 months, resulting in nearly 5,000 baptisms. The massive effort was led by both pastors and lay people, with training events held to build up the confidence and skills of new evangelists. A baptism of more than 300 people at Lake Atitlan attracted family and friends as well as curious spectators. The Adventist Church in Inter-America plans to involve 1 million members in discipleship activities during the next few years. At least 60,000 of them will be in Guatemala. For many of us, nothing builds faith more than hearing a true story of answered prayer. And that is what has motivated the launch of a new website, featuring a growing number of personal testimonies about times when God's power has been clearly seen.
Not a very complicated prayer, but I meant every word of it.
God or Buddha or whatever God is there up there.
And I had a conversation with God in that moment.
They put the phone to his ear, to the dead man's ear, and she prayed to God.
As soon as I got off my knees, I heard a voice at my front door.
Much prayer, much blessing. Little prayer, little blessing.
And my prayer was answered.
The Answered.tv website is part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church's Revival and Reformation campaign. And that's the news for this week. James, what a great initiative. I just think that's great, you know, to see God as a living God, you know.
I think it is fabulous. And they're adding a new video every week, so it's worth not only visiting once, but going back and checking it out, because I think all of us need a little bit of encouragement now and again, don't we?
We sure do.
Well, stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with all the news from Canberra. Stay with us.
So you think you've got your future all planned out, right? Or maybe you're not sure yet what you want to do, who you want to be. But whatever path you choose to study, a great education matters. Because it doesn't just help you get a great job, it helps you prepare for what life can throw at you and live a great life. Avondale, it's education designed for life.
Who is Jesus? A 6-part exploration of the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ. In this series, we'll look at how Jesus helps us understand issues facing us today, such as pain and healing, how we treat each other, worry-free living, fear of the future, and the kingdom of God. That's our quest, to come eye to eye, if you will, with Jesus, the real Jesus.
Hello, welcome back. And joining me now from Canberra is the Australian Christian Lobby's Lyle Shelton. How are you, Lyle?
Yeah, I'm really well, thanks, Kent.
There's speculation, Lyle, that the federal government may renege on its election promise to lift foreign aid in the budget. Considering the economic times, is this warranted?
I don't believe it is, Kent. Australia is a very wealthy country, and I know that the government is intent on bringing the budget back into surplus, but as John Beckett from Micah Challenge says, we shouldn't do this on the back of our responsibility to the world's poor. At the moment, we're talking about 50 cents in every $100 of our gross national income going to help poor people in disadvantaged countries. This is where people don't have proper sanitation and clean water. Yes. So I think as a wealthy country we can afford to be generous. We've got an election commitment to raise our percentage of foreign aid to 0.5% of gross national income by 2015. That's still well short of the Millennium Development targets, and I think the least we can do is keep that commitment to the poor and not cause this to be a casualty of budget cuts.
On a different topic now, Lyle, there's been a lot of media commentary at the shock resignation of Bob Brown, the leader of the Greens. What do you think will be his political legacy?
Well, certainly it's a legacy that has tried to raise the importance of the environment, and that's fair enough. I think both sides of politics have now embraced a largely green agenda, but he leaves a very negative legacy in terms of social policy and in terms of the dignity of human life from conception to natural death. I mean, the Greens are big proponents of euthanasia, which really impacts the vulnerable at the end of life, and also they're big supporters of abortion. In addition to that, they've been running this agenda to deconstruct the natural family. So it's ironic on one hand they want a great ecosystem for trees and for animals, and yet the optimum ecosystem for a child they want to deconstruct. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in Greens policies, unfortunately.
But Lyle, you've just been telling us foreign aid is under threat, and the Greens under Bob Brown's leadership have been the lone voice in Parliament calling for an increase. It's the Greens who are calling for welfare benefits to be increased. It's the Greens who are calling for the government to account for its blind commitment to the budget surplus you mentioned earlier. Surely you could give them some credit on these issues.
Yeah, look, you can argue about various aspects of Greens policy. Yes, I'd give them a tick for their stance on foreign aid, but when you look at, on balance, their overall agenda, it really is one that's quite negative towards family, towards the sort of social structures that are necessary for a civil society. So I would give them a negative score rather than a positive one overall.
Okay, thanks for your time, Lyle.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Kent. Thank you.
Back to you, James.
Thanks so much, Kent. I think one of the most scary things in life would be to have a stroke because of the disability that comes with the dog.
Absolute disability can be a mild stroke or a horrible stroke.
Right.
It's a very, very disabling thing. We don't like it. We try and avoid it at all costs.
Now, today you have some information that maybe can help us avoid stroke,
Absolutely.
At least the risk of stroke.
Yes, and as you know, on this program we bring you up-to-date newsy bits and pieces. This one comes from the Medical Journal of Australia, which is put out by the Australian Medical Association, the Doctor's Bible in Australia, and also read worldwide. And it has a scary story in it regarding analgesics or simple old painkillers.
Right.
Now, for many, many years up to the 1950s, simple old aspirin was considered the ideal drug, in inverted commas, of choice for fevers and pain. Very, very successful. However, they then started noting that folk were getting hemorrhages from aspirin, and at about the same time, another product became available called paracetamol, caused Panadol, common in Australia, Tylenol in America, and various other names in various parts of the world. And this was a good painkiller, very, very good. However, it wasn't quite good enough for other people with back pains and chronic pains.
Joint problems and
Absolutely. So the clever people then developed the NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the NSAIDs. The first one being stuff called ibuprofen, which is available under a whole variety of different names and trade names. Another one called naproxen, also with a variety of different trade names. These were very, very good. They reduced pain extremely well and seemed to be devoid of side effects. Right. So more and more people took these, millions, tens of millions. Then they got very, very clever and got another variation of these called a COX-2 inhibitors. That was the general name of the family of medications. And then as more people took these, they started getting heart attacks and a whole lot of other horrible things.
Those are the COX-2 inhibitors.
That's right.
And there have been lawsuits over that, and some of them have been taken off the market,
They've
I
been
think.
ripped off the market, totally.
But ibuprofen and naproxen are still with us.
They're still with us, okay, and they're very, very successful, generally speaking. However, according to a new report here, red flags are starting to be waved, because some reports are saying, okay, they are starting to cause heart disorders, and the latest nasty report says that a certain number of people are going to get a stroke as a result, so they say, of taking the NSAIDs.
This is new research.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, that's published the other day in this journal. And this will start to get bigger and bigger as time goes on, as more people hear about it. You can buy this stuff over the counter, OTC, so we're suggesting to people, look, if you have aches and pains, go for the simple ones first, go for the Panadol, the Tylenol. That is first-line drug medication of first choice. If that doesn't work, please see your doctor, have a talk about it, and maybe take in limited doses these so-called non-steroidals. So the thing is, there is a risk. As long as you know the risks, the benefits have got to outweigh the risks, so it's a case of who decides what to do. The patient should be informed.
And always talk with your doctor about it. Well, stay with us, and we'll be right back after the break.
We thank all our supporters for helping It Is Written become Australia's #1 Bible television program. Thank you for enabling It Is Written to offer spiritual solutions and advice to millions of viewers every week via free-to-air broadcasts in Australia, New Zealand and now Papua New Guinea. Without the ongoing generosity and prayers of our supporters, none of this would be possible. We can't thank you enough.
Welcome back. It's great to have Matt Parra with us. He's the new Director of Evangelism for the Adventist Church in the northern area of New South Wales. Thanks so much, Matt, and welcome to not only the show, but also welcome to Australia.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, Matt, you grew up in Key West, Florida, a little island right at the end of Florida where Ernest Hemingway lived, and Jimmy Buffett. Some people are familiar with his music. It's sort of all around there. What was it like growing up in Key West?
Oh, it was exciting because there's lots of children there.
Okay.
Yeah, tons of kids and fruit trees to climb and fish to catch.
That's right, it's sort of tropical, isn't it? It's a fabulous place. Now, as you grew up, once you got to high school, you grew up in the church.
I did.
But you kind of hit a rough patch when you got to high school.
I did. I just never really felt my deep need of a Savior in any way, and the attractions of the world are pretty strong.
Sure, of course. And Key West sort of has a bit of a reputation as a party place.
That's right. That's right.
And so after high school, what did you do with your life?
Yeah, I really just wasted time for about 2 years, and then joined the United States Navy.
What made you decide to join the Navy?
Yeah, when I graduated high school, I wasn't doing a whole lot with my life, and a lot of TV commercials at that time about the U.S. Navy and the purpose and the value that you could get out of it. And,
sort of patriotism and so forth.
Patriotism, idealism, and I just wanted my life to mean something. And after watching enough commercials, I decided that's where I needed to be.
They got you hook, line, and sinker.
Absolutely.
So you were in the Navy for one term of duty. You decided to, at the end of that term, get out. Why?
Yeah, I did my time, and I felt like a life in military service wasn't really for me. I was a little bit disenchanted with some of the things that I saw in the Navy.
What?
There's a lot of great men and a lot of great women who serve with honor.
Sure.
But there's also a lot that don't. And there was a lot of marital infidelity.
Sure.
There's a lot of drug abuse and alcohol abuse. And just a lot of general negativity.
Sure.
I joined the Navy because I wanted to pay my dues to my country, and I didn't sense that a lot of people were there for that reason, and that really kind of got to me.
So it wasn't all officer and gentleman stuff?
Not altogether, no.
So you get out of the Navy.
Yeah.
What do you do next?
Yeah, I get out of the Navy, really frustrated with life, and I just don't really know what to do when I get out. I'm pretty depressed because my marriage had failed while I was in the Navy.
Sure.
Not sensing God's presence in my life in any way. I don't have meaning. I don't really want to get educated and live a normal life because I'm feeling that one day you grow old and you die and you leave your stuff to someone else, and in 10,000 years your life means nothing. And that sounds very, very negative, but that's kind of where I was. And
you're sort of in a nihilistic phase.
Very nihilistic, and I was thinking, if you don't know God, if your life doesn't have transcendent meaning, then what's the point? So I got into drug abuse and dancing and partying in the nightclubs. And it sounds kind of funny to even say now, but drugs became a way for me to get enjoyment out of life and to forget, you know, the mistakes that I had made, the pains that I had suffered. Yeah, and it was just, I thought to myself, I'll live like this till I'm 40 and have a great life, and then I'll just die. Because who wants to get old? You know, who wants to live an old life? You know, getting wrinkly and falling apart and these kinds of things.
So obviously you're not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet.
So what happened?
You know, the Lord rescued me. I went to Mexico, and I went to Mexico on a mission trip with my mom's church. And it's kind of strange that a drug addict dealer goes to Mexico on a mission trip.
That's right, because Mexico's awash with drugs.
Yeah. So because my mom, she lied to me and she tricked me, and I couldn't tell you the whole story, but she tricks me into going, and 2 weeks of service to other people, ministry to other people, leaving the drugs, you know, behind, because I had to take care of some youth from my mom's church while I was there, and yeah, it just moved me. Doing work for others and contributing to the better good of someone else's life, it just planted seeds in my heart. And it really gave me a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction that drugs didn't. And that became kind of like a catalyst for my conversion experience. Several other events happened leading up to a meeting that I went to. My mom dragged me to a series of meetings where the gospel was preached, and that began.
Was that the David Asherick meeting?
Yeah, David Asherick was preaching a meeting in Orlando, Florida. And I was one of the people. It was a very simple meeting. It was in a tent. It was old-fashioned. It was hot. It was the middle of summer. And lo and behold, 700 people came. And
you were one?
I was one of them.
And it changed your life?
I was one of them, yeah.
So after you gave your life to Christ, you decided to go into evangelism.
Went into evangelism. I went to a school of evangelism that they had come from, and learned the blessing of sharing, really, and that the Christian experience is not an experience of just, me, you know, it's an experience of giving and sharing and blessing others, and yeah.
So now you're here in Australia. I mean, this is an incredible story, Ark. You start off in Key West. You're off on the aircraft carrier with the U.S. Navy. You find God after coming back after 2 years of sort of wasted years in the party scene. And now you're here in New South Wales.
In New South Wales.
What do you plan to do?
You know, I just plan to learn and to grow and just to be as faithful as I can possibly be. I know that God is at work, and I believe that that's the case, and I see that that's the case in the lives of the constituents here, the church members here. I just want to assist the church in its mission, and I want to help people in their calling. God is working in people's lives, and they just oftentimes don't believe that that's the case, and I just want to really be an inspirer and an equipper.
Well, I think you're going to also find, Matt, that your experience, these wasted years, these 2 years in sort of party scene, there are a lot of people in this country who are caught in that trap of just alcohol and drug abuse and nihilism. Your experience and your ability to share that, I think, is going to prove to be very, very valuable.
Amen. Yeah, I think so. It's amazing what God can do when we make ourselves available to Him. That's what I've sensed. He gives us gifts. He can use anyone, and I think.
And you're not a pastor either.
No, not officially. I carry the title of pastor. I'm not someone who's been trained in a traditional way. I'm more along the lines of, I guess, a James or a John or a Peter. I'm not a Paul. And I think that there's a lot of Peters and Jameses and Johns out there who think that since they're not Pauls, that God can't use them, and since they don't have an academic background, that they can't be used. But that's just not true. Like it's just not true.
Now, if people want to get involved and be part of this evangelism movement, where can they go?
Right. We're actually having a training at Avondale Memorial Church, May the 13th through 27th, a lay training program. We call it Bible Boot Camp. Helps people to learn how to share their faith.
Well, I think a lot of our viewers are going to be interested in it. The address is right up there to find out more. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break.
What is it about the increase of world disasters that creates so much interest? People want answers. No wonder the last book of the Bible attracts so much attention. Revelation Series is a fresh new approach to learning and sharing teachings on the apocalypse. Be enlightened by the 24-part DVD and booklet presentations.
For anyone who wants to study or to teach the book of Revelation, this new series is a must.
If you'd like to order your copy or to find out more, visit revelationhope.com.
G'day, did you see the Logies Television Awards the other night? Current craze British-Irish boy band One Direction sang What Makes You Beautiful to adoring fans, mainly teenage girls. Now why did they enjoy the song so much? You are beautiful because you are who you are. And so I ask you, what is it about us humans that makes us long to hear someone say, "You're so beautiful, I love you"? Look, if the fittest survive, if evolution's story was true, if our universe has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference, is love simply a chemical mix to ensure bonding, to promote stronger communities? Is that what you think of when someone says, "I love you"? There is another view. What if a benevolent, all-powerful, intelligent creator being, a God of love, was real? What if he both gives love and enjoys receiving love? The most ancient holy texts speak of such a supreme spiritual being. The most ancient pages of the Holy Bible tell why it means so much when someone says, "I love you." Listen to how Moses recorded the words of God in Genesis 1:27. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. You see, it's no wonder human beings long to hear the words, "You're so beautiful, I love you." Why? You and I have been made in the image of a loving God. Always remember, whatever you do, wherever you go, God really does love you.
Thanks so much, James. Now, over this last week, I heard that you finished your first draft of your first book, Danielle, and it's all about being connected with each other and also connected with God. What's that all about?
It is, James. It's called Every Heart's Cry.
Great.
It's going to be, I hope, a great read. But you've had some exciting things happen in your family this week also.
Yeah, we have. This last week, it was my in-laws' 50th wedding anniversary. That's Bob and Jean Morton. Hi, Bob and Jean. They've really been a great example, a great Christian example to us over all those years, and it's really an achievement, particularly in this world today. Huh?
It is.
We hope you've enjoyed this program, and don't forget, if you've missed an episode,
or you'd like to just see it all over again.
That's right. Just go to our website, infocus.org.au. Check it out. Until next week, may God bless you.
And stay safe.